What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and continue learning about the Nazi occupation of Norway in World War II. This is part 4 of a series that I've been doing, learning about this part of Norwegian history. And if you haven't seen part 1, part 2, or part 3, feel free to go check those out first, or stay here in part 4. That's perfectly fine. But so far in this series, I have learned about a part of Norwegian history that they do not teach us here in the United States, about how Norway was invaded by Nazis. Norway formed a resistance. There were concentration camps in Norway. I never knew that. There were underground newspapers trying to spread news and a way for Norwegians to communicate with each other secretly, and Norwegian supply ships trying to help the Allies even while Norway was being invaded. And all this stuff I never knew about. So today, I'm very excited to continue learning about this. So let's take a look.
With a legitimate government in London and young men flocking to join the fight, Norway's commitment to the Allied cause was not in any doubt. The problem that now faced the authorities in London and at home was how to organize an effective military resistance without jeopardizing the civilian population.
Yeah, that's very difficult, isn't it? As I've said before in the other parts, I can't even imagine what this would be like for your home to be invaded by enemies. And then you have to worry about stuff like this, civilians. You want to form a military resistance and fight back, but you have to be so careful and cognizant of the innocent civilians that could get hurt in your country. I can't even imagine what that's like.
For various reasons, this problem was to prove singularly difficult to overcome in the years that followed. The Resistance Museum in Oslo is housed in an old building in Akershus Castle, next to a memorial that marks the spot where Norwegian patriots were executed by the German occupying forces.
Oh my God.
Their death was part of a bitterly hard learning process for a peace-loving population with no great military tradition and no experience of organized resistance to an invader.
Right. Of course, this is kind of the first time Norway is having to deal with something like this. So I am interested to learn more about how Norway did respond to this.
Resistance had to be invented, had to be taught, had to be learned. The military organization, the Milorg, was formed gradually, and in the autumn of 1941,
Wow.
it was authorized by the Norwegian government in London.
Okay. Right, so the Norwegian government has escaped, is now in London, but still intact, still there, still a government. Norway is still Norway, and trying to organize this military resistance back in Norway at home.
Milorg was slow to expand and at first avoided action and even weapons, gradually building up a secret centralized army and preparing quietly for the day of liberation.
Oh, wow.
Its intention was to go slow, lie low, and by not attracting attention, avoid placing the lives of ordinary citizens at risk.
Yeah, okay.
There were, of course, difficulties. Norway was quite an open society. People weren't great at keeping secrets. This is certainly a theme that seems to run through British cooperation with the Norwegians. And the Gestapo did manage to penetrate certain groups on the west coast in 1941 with, roundups and arrests that follow. But I think...
Man, yeah, I mean, make no mistake. Being a part of this resistance, trying to form this little military resistance, and you were putting your life on the line. Absolutely. Like, they knew what would happen if they were discovered. But it was that important to Norwegians to do this. So that's very brave.
I think by late 1941, this has been got over, and we see them moving towards something of a more effective, more homogeneous resistance movement.
Coordinating resistance under the harshly repressive Nazi regime was a severe challenge because Norway suffered the highest level of occupation of any country in Europe.
Really?
250,000 troops by 1942, rising to over 400,000 by the end of the war.
Why did Norway have it so bad? Jeez. Out of every country Germany occupied, Norway had it the worst, with the most amount of German soldiers there.
German for every 8 Norwegians.
Well, they say 1 German for every 8 Norwegians.
And in a country where bridges and ferry crossings create natural bottlenecks, policing the population through identity cards was comparatively easy.
I had to leave my home in Oslo, of course. I had a room rented there, and I had now different passports. I had to make a new passport in the name of Andersen instead of Sønsteby. And later on it was discovered by the secret police, and then I had to shift. So, and I stayed now from 42. I had almost 10 hideouts. So I had no difficulties to keep away from the Gestapo.
That is insane. They actually have somebody here, a Norwegian, who was part of the World War II Norwegian resistance. He had a fake passport, fake identity, and everything. That is amazing.
I had no difficulties to keep away from the Gestapo.
Huh.
One way that Norwegians could make a serious contribution to the war was to supply intelligence to the Allies.
Right.
For more urgent intelligence, there was a network of wireless operators, particularly along the coast. Their task was to watch the movements of the German fleet along Norway's jagged coastline.
Norway
Another risky thing to do. To give, but this is again an example of Norwegians putting their life at risk to help the Allies, to help all the other countries in the world by supplying intelligence, information about German ships. And I mean, this is, aside from, like, if you're gonna be invaded and occupied, this is really Norwegians going out of their way to do the most possible to make the best of the situation, to get the intelligence and build up the resistance, and it's really amazing to learn about.
Norway is only really important in British strategy when it comes to the German Navy, which virtually the entire surface fleet is based there. And for the British, the threat that this might initially break out into the Atlantic, later on attack the Arctic convoys, is of major significance.
Okay.
This network, operated jointly by SIS and the Norwegian Intelligence Office in London, grew rapidly. Their most celebrated success was the sustained 2-year observation of the battleship Tirpitz as it moved from one hiding place to another.
Oh, jeez.
She was finally destroyed by bombing near Tromsø in 1944.
Wow.
Inland,
Oh my
Milorg
God.
set up a further 70 stations of its own, using secretly built equipment. And SOE had its own networks.
No way.
All of them were highly vulnerable to sophisticated German direction-finding techniques.
No way. Norwegians were setting up all these little communications bases. Again, at severe risk to themselves.
Records show that the Norwegian Intelligence Office in London handled nearly 6,000 radio reports and 20,000 reports by courier in the course of the war.
Wow.
The contribution these agents made to the eventual Allied victory is incalculable.
Wow.
Jens Anton Paulsen was among the thousands of young men who escaped from Norway and ended up in England looking for a chance to take the fight back to the enemy.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He joined Norwegian Independent Company No. 1, known as the Martin Linge Company, after its founder. Members of the company underwent rigorous fitness training and learnt sabotage techniques under the overall control of the Special Operations Executive.
Wow. So these are Norwegians who have managed to escape Norway. They're living in England. And they're also, in addition to the Norwegians at home forming a resistance, there's Norwegians in England training in a more normal way, military training, for this eventual day of reckoning.
OE.
I went through all the SOE courses, well, 2 or 3 at that time, I think, and later on, I believe I have been through most of the courses the SOE was running.
Wow.
Norwegian Independent Company No. 1. We got a very nice place in Scotland,
Oh, wow.
in the Avonmore area, with the Cairngorm Mountains and country.
Really?
It was very similar to Norway. Very good place to stay and train for Norwegian.
No way. I had no idea about this. Well, I had no idea about any of this. Nazis and Norway and the World War II. But specifically, that's interesting. Norwegians got to England, then were given a military training base in Scotland, actually.
Many SOE-trained agents were on their way back to Norway via what became known as the Shetland Bus, a clandestine ferry operation consisting of fishing boats.
Oh.
It was an extremely hazardous operation, often undertaken in foul weather and heavy seas, and with the constant risk of capture or worse.
Seriously, so these are Norwegians. These are Norwegians who are safe. They're in Scotland. They're safe. They're away. But they choose to get on these boats and go back to Norway to fight. That's incredible. I mean, seriously.
SOE's Shetland base was also used to launch commando raids against German forces and installations in Norway. One such raid was the Claymore operation against the Lofoten Islands on the 4th of March 1941.
Really?
Undertaken without the prior knowledge of the Norwegian government in London, who protested on behalf of their citizens who suffered reprisals, with homes burned and people arrested.
Oh, jeez. So these were Norwegian rebel resistance who attacked. It was a raid in the Lofoten Islands. I've heard of that. But it wasn't approved by the Norwegian government. That's interesting. I guess you could expect that, huh? Inevitably, for certain people to act on their own, trying to fight. But unfortunately, it ended up in civilian casualties and destruction, which that's kind of war, isn't it, unfortunately?
Norwegian commandos who had taken part in the raid felt disillusioned and began to doubt whether it was right to operate under British orders to achieve British military objectives.
Oh, it was a British order. Oh, it was a British order. Oh, interesting. Little conflict of interest there.
This view was compounded by the death of Martin Linge in the Anklet raid against Måløy in December 1941.
Milorg, of course, is operating under a philosophy that they are saving their strength for the day that the liberation comes, and thus can be an effective sort of secret army in support of any Allied landings in Norway. And they're husbanding their strength while SOE are coming in and causing trouble, which, of course, often leads to crackdowns, and that leads to tension between the two groups. Indeed, amongst SOE, there is a belief that Milorg is a bunch of dangerous amateurs and should be avoided at all cost.
Oh, what the heck? Who? What? this is definitely one of those things you don't ever think about. There's different resistances in Norway. The SOE, which is Norwegians that have been trained in Scotland and England and London that are part of the British military in a sense. And then there's the local Norwegian resistance that's being formed in Norway in secret, that's made mostly with normal people, what they call amateurs, who are trying to train and resist at home. And of course, that's a good thing as well. It just seems like they were on different pages, like there wasn't collaboration between the two, which you can understand how that would be difficult in this situation.
1942 was a bad year for Milorg. Many of its networks were penetrated, hundreds were arrested, 24 of its leaders and a number of innocent citizens were shot. The setbacks brought about a wholesale revision of Milorg's strategy. The choice was stark. It could remain poorly trained, poorly equipped and vulnerable, or it could become a decentralized, fully trained and armed guerrilla organization.
Okay.
For that, it needed London's help.
Oh, they're going to join the British, the London British operations, Milorg, the Norwegian rebel resistance in Norway. Had a huge setback. They were discovered, leaders executed, and now it's like a chance to sort of rebuild from the ground up. And at least this means that everybody's going to be kind of on the same page, I guess, all collaborating with the British government, I guess. And you know what? I think that's actually a good place to stop. This is such an interesting part of Norwegian history, and there's so much to this story. This is a very long documentary. This is definitely going to be a couple more parts long for me to get through all of this, but I think it's well worth it because this is just obviously an incredible, huge part of Norwegian history that us Americans know nothing about. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this so far, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on Norway during World War II, the German Nazi occupation, anything we've talked about here today. That'd be awesome to hear about from Norwegians. And if you're interested in the next part of this series or just more videos like this, me reacting to different parts of Norwegian culture, seeing things about Norway I've never seen or learned before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.